The reactor behind me was screaming, and I had 10 seconds to make a choice that would follow me for the rest of my life. Smoke poured through the broken hull of the Zhishtari flagship. Alarms shrieked in a language I did not understand, yet somehow every sound told me the same thing. The ship was dying, and so was everyone still standing inside it who did not move fast enough. My name is Daniel Reeve, Staff Sergeant, 9th Fleet, and 30 minutes earlier, I had led the boarding team that ended a war nobody thought humans could win. Now the enemy admiral was dead, the bridge was open, and I was the highest-ranking human left breathing on that deck, which meant, under the strange old treaty rules, the Zhishtari themselves had written long before humans ever reached the stars, the choice of victory now belonged to me. I did not know that yet. All I knew was the floor was shaking, and a woman in gray was still sitting calmly in a corner of the burning bridge, not running, not screaming, just watching me, the way you watch weather you cannot control. "Move!" I shouted at her, pulling her up by the arm. She did not resist, but she did not thank me either. Her eyes were sharp, careful, studying my face like she was trying to solve a puzzle in the middle of a collapsing building. We ran together through corridors filling with smoke, past crew members who ignored her completely, as if she were furniture that happened to be walking. That struck me as strange, even with alarms screaming and the floor tilting under our boots. Nobody protected her. Nobody even looked at her twice. We reached the escape pod bay seconds before a support beam came down where we had been standing. The ship split apart behind us in a wave of white light, and then there was only silence, and stars, and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. 3 weeks later, the war was over, and I found myself standing in a court I did not understand, surrounded by Zhishtari nobles in shining robes, about to make the second impossible choice of my life. The peace treaty had one strange old clause. The soldier who delivered the final blow was allowed to choose one prize from the defeated royal house: a ship, a weapon, or, if he wished, a hostage of noble blood, to be treated with full honor for the length of the peace. Every officer around me assumed I would choose wisely, meaning I would choose power. I stood at the front of a long hall, while 12 daughters of the Zhishtari Empire were presented to me, one by one, like items in a shop window. Each one had a title: commander of this fleet, hero of that battle, conqueror of some far colony I had never heard of. Their names were announced with pride, their victories listed like medals pinned to armor. I barely listened. I was watching the end of the line, where a 12th woman stood in plain gray, no medals, no fleet, and no introduction worth remembering. "And this," the court announcer said, waving a hand toward her, the way you might wave away a fly, "is Nayara, the unbonded. She commands nothing. She is of no consequence." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the hall. I looked at her. She stood exactly the way she had stood on that burning bridge 3 weeks earlier, calm, straight, refusing to flinch. It took me a second to recognize her without the smoke and the fear around us. She was the woman I had pulled out of the fire. The fleet marshal beside me, a tall Zhishtari officer with silver markings on his face, leaned in and whispered that I should choose Vantressa, the eldest daughter, commander of an entire legion, a prize worthy of the war's true winner. Vantressa gave me a look of practiced boredom, already certain of her own value, already bored of pretending to wait for my decision. I looked past her, all the way down the line, to the woman nobody wanted. "Her," I said, pointing at Nayara. "I choose her." The laughter stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion I had heard in the war. The fleet marshal actually laughed out loud, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. He told me I misunderstood the offer, that Nayara had no fleet, no bond worth, no value to trade, and that choosing her cost the Empire nothing, because she was already considered worthless. "Then nobody will mind giving her to me," I said. Guards brought her down from the platform. She did not thank me. She studied my face again, the same sharp calculation from the burning bridge, and asked in careful, clear speech why I would choose someone with no value when I could have chosen power. "You had value on that ship," I told her. "You knew exactly where the exits were before I did. You just never got the chance to prove it here." She said nothing to that, but something changed behind her eyes, something small and unreadable. She came aboard my ship with one small case of belongings, and no guards of her own, because nobody had bothered to give the unwanted princess an escort. My crew did not know what to make of her at first. She barely spoke for the first week, but she watched everything. She read every screen, every panel, every system report she could access, learning our ship faster than some of my own officers. The first sign of trouble came 11 days later, during a routine supply run near a quiet border station. Nayara was sitting in the corner of the command deck, silent as always, when the sensors picked up 3 unregistered ships closing in from behind a moon. My tactical officer froze. The ships were not responding to any signal. They were positioning exactly the way pirates position before an ambush, cutting off our escape routes one by one. "They are using an old raiding pattern," Nayara said quietly, before anyone else had figured out what was happening. "My father's enemies used it during the border wars. They will not attack directly. They will disable our engines first, then board us while we are stranded." Nobody on my crew had heard of that pattern before. I had seconds to decide whether to trust the word of a woman my own allies had called worthless 3 weeks earlier. I trusted her. We reversed course early, faster than the raiders expected, cutting through a narrow gap between 2 asteroids that Nayara pointed out on the map before I even finished asking if one existed. The raider ships tried to follow and clipped each other in the tight space, giving us just enough time to reach the safety of the station's defense range. My crew stared at her with new eyes. She did not smile. She simply returned to her seat and kept watching the screens, as if saving all our lives was something she expected of herself and nothing more. After that, I started asking her questions. Why had someone with a mind like hers never commanded a fleet of her own? It took weeks before she gave me a full answer. In her culture, a daughter's worth was measured only by the size of the fleet promised to her at birth. She had been born during a moment of crisis in her family, and that crisis had stripped away her birthright before she ever spoke her first word. No fleet meant no command. No command meant no respect. It did not matter how sharp her mind was. The system had already decided her value before she had a chance to prove otherwise. "They did not lose a resource," I told her one night, both of us awake long after the rest of the crew had gone to rest. "They just never learned how to read the one they had." She looked at me the way she often did, like I had said something in a language she was still learning to understand. She told me that where she came from, kindness was treated like a trade, something people gave only when they expected something valuable in return. She said choosing her, a woman with nothing to offer, made no sense unless I already understood something the others did not. Months later, when the peace between our 2 peoples nearly broke apart over a dispute about old trade routes, both sides needed someone who understood the tangled history of Zhutari supply networks and the terms humans would actually accept. They called for an advisor. Van Tressa, the celebrated commander, sat in that meeting with nothing useful to offer. The person who solved the crisis in under 20 minutes was standing quietly behind my shoulder in plain gray, the same as always. The room that had once laughed at her name went completely silent while she spoke. Nobody called her the Unbonded that day. They were too busy writing down every word she said. Afterward, in the hallway outside, the same fleet marshal who once told me I was choosing garbage approached us slowly. He cleared his throat and asked, with visible effort, whether Nayara would consider taking a formal seat on the new council being formed to manage the peace. She looked at him for a long moment, then she looked at me. "I already have a place I belong," she said, and walked past him toward the ship waiting to take us home. I never figured out the exact moment I stopped seeing her as a prize I had won out of stubbornness and started seeing her as the sharpest mind on my ship. There was no single instant. It happened slowly, the way a small correction in direction eventually leads you somewhere completely different from where you thought you were going. They told me she was worthless because nobody had ever bothered to see her clearly. It turns out worth was never something they had the right to decide in the first place.